Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duvall, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, by Grabthar's hammer, by the sons of Warvan, shall be avenged.
Tim Longo. Yep.
Hey. Thought I'd try to find something suitably melodramatic there for you.
Yes, we are in the land of melodrama.
We sure are. Yeah, this is not
melodrama.
Yep, not small storytelling here.
And everything's at stake.
Yeah, everything. The universes are at stake.
Yeah, and that, I mean, we're of course talking about Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, or sometimes called Soul Reaver 1. And it is very gothic, very melodramatic, like we said. Vampires and zombies and
wraiths
and elder gods and like it's basic. There's kitchen sink going on here to some degree when it comes to the setting.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a horror's who's who. You know, it combines sort of the Western sort of Christian malevolent forces that kind of came from Eastern Europe and things like that, with some Lovecraftian stuff and things that you cannot know and sort of that sort of thing. We're not really playing it necessarily so much because of its horror or influences or anything like that, but more because of the the sort of starting point that it is for storytelling by one of games' greatest storytellers, Amy Hennig, who was the equivalent of a creative director on this project. I think they just say director in the
just director, and she was working at Crystal Dynamics at the time, and most of you probably know, but yeah, Crystal Dynamics has inherited Tomb Raider over the years, and including sort of a couple sort of reboots. Tomb Raider Legend was a big game for them when they took over the franchise, and then the Tomb Raider reboot itself.
That would have been like 2007, I want to say. 2006, along those lines. That's when I played it.
Yeah, 5 or 6 or something like that. Yeah, because I joined in 6, I think, and Legend had just come out or been out for maybe.
Yeah, it was 2006.
Yeah.
You're right.
So yeah, Crystal's a really a good studio, a bit of an underdog studio, I think, and then now they're working on Marvel stuff, which is exciting. So yeah, their legacy is, as far as like third person action adventure games, their legacy is definitely well known. In fact, a few people from Crystal migrated to Naughty Dog eventually as well. Evan Wells, Richard LeMarchand, and Amy.
Right, of course.
And so those two studios definitely tend to battle it out, back and forth. Obviously, with the Uncharted series that Amy also helped start there with Evan and everybody, and so the reason we're playing this particular game, especially because of the third-person action influences, but also Amy's influence on things, and it's become a bit of a cult classic when it comes to storytelling and structure, and some of it is just because of the Gothic nature of it that it's become a cult classic, but also, as Brett mentioned, storytelling-wise and sort of structurally, the way that things are set up in the game. In this era, not many studios were able to actually do a fairly good job at that. It was, most Tomb Raider, I think, was 96, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah.
And as far as third person, action adventure games and console, there really weren't many trying to push kind of an elaborate story. You got them in RPGs and things like that, but third person or first person games really weren't doing much. And you mentioned earlier that sort of the light touch of the storytelling. What did you mean by that when you mentioned the...
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things... I mean, even though the story is kind of big and bombastic, it also, at the same time, isn't constantly hitting you over the head. Mm-hmm. It is very focused on this character. It is, I often say on this, I'm not a person who's really into lore, and this isn't a game where you're constantly being fed a stream of lore baloney. It's more like you kind of move along, and then you encounter something, and it says, these are this. And you just kind of get little bits. You don't. There's not a constant, steady stream of story. It's more. You start to understand. I mean, the most of it, I guess, comes sort of at the very beginning, which we'll get into. But there is kind of a dump at the beginning of just like setting up, in true Gothic terms, just how horrible the revenge that is due the Soul Reaver. Raziel, how, so it sets up that, and I do think that just from a storytelling perspective needs to be as big as it is, but even there, it's not enormous, it doesn't spend a lot of time, telling you a lot of story, it feels like this is a story that took the advice that they give like screenwriters, which is, right up to page 50 and then just start your story actually on page 50 and just throw away the first 50 pages because all that stuff that you did to set it up, you want to start it in the middle of something happening. And this game doesn't start by explaining to us who all the vampires are, and it's going to backfill all of that stuff later. As a person who hasn't actually ever played any of these games, I appreciated that I didn't need to know anything about the first game, which was developed by another developer, Silicon Knights, who have made, I guess, one of my favorite GameCube games, Eternal Darkness. But anyway, that's Dennis Diak's studio. They had done the first one, and I guess Eidos published, and at that time, it would have been pretty common for a publisher to take IP ownership as part of the deal, even though all the development of that IP was probably done by the studio. That still probably happens to a degree, but I don't know, around this time, because this would have been I guess a few years before Max Payne, but as time moved on, there were people in the industry who were more independent. I'm thinking of George Broussard at 3D Realms, in particular, saying, no, don't just give away your IP; it's worth something. And that tide started to swing the other way. Yeah. But anyway, I'm happy that I don't need to know a ton. It's like, Kain's the king of the vampires. Raziel and a few others are like his lieutenants, or whatever, dukes. And he doesn't like being shown up. And when he's shown up, he hits back hard, rips the wings right off of Raziel and throws him in a giant pit. Yeah. For good. And I'm like, and it happens about that fast, right? I mean, it doesn't introduce you to all the characters who are there. It's just, I was there with my brothers, and turned out I had been growing wings, and Kain didn't like that, and it shows you what happens as a result. And I just love that it just jumps right in. I don't need to know a lot about all the relationships that are going on there. I don't need to know that they have power struggles and whatever. None of that's going to matter, as it turns out anyway, because soon it's going to be turned into more of a ruined world.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's definitely. So now I get what you mean by light touch, and like less is more, and just kind of give you the basics so you have an understanding of what your motivation is going to be as a player and as a character, but don't really feel the need to go much deeper than that. And there's a couple lines, I think, in that opening cinematic that mentions a little bit about Kain's past and how he came to power and kind of gained, his abilities and such, and sort of taking over the material world and all of that kind of stuff. And then it just, like you said, it just quickly becomes a revenge story. Very simply becomes a revenge story because of what he does to you. And then you kind of become this anti-hero after you kind of fall into the void and you're woken up by this elder god that, as Brett mentioned, sort of Cthulhu influence. You don't really know anything about that entity either. but you become this, you/Raziel become the Soul Reaver. I guess by the hand of the Elder God. Is that what you understood as well?
Yeah, my understanding is that, because Raziel was able to maintain some semblance of sanity despite endless torment, that strips his body away.
Right,
that he's proven worthy to, carry the power that the soul reaving entails. And I don't really know where it's going. Like, I don't know if this Elder God has obviously it has its own motives, but it's kind of unclear what those might be. And so there's already a little bit of mystery there. Like, I'm doing this thing for this, I'm making a deal with another sort of devil so that I can get my revenge. And I love all of that. So
yeah, and I mean, there's also kind of a simple construct that they set up in a pretty traditional, I guess I'll say maybe Zelda way or something like that, or maybe even Metroid. It's kind of, there's some Metroidvania stuff going on, it seems, as well, where you know that there's these series of characters or bosses or in oh my goodness.
I found...
Hey, Siri.
Oh, jeez. Anyway, in the form of the lieutenants that Brett was talking about, that ended up being essentially like the brethren of Raziel, and the conceit is that you're going to go around to each of them, and they'll be the bosses, but they'll also be sort of the structure of everything. And it seems like, even though I didn't make it to the first boss, you were mentioning you did, that from each boss you get a power. And
that's right.
That's
yep.
The Metroidvania sort of side of it comes in, which is not unlike Metroid.
Yeah, or even more so Zelda, I think, because in Metroid, it's often you get the power. Well, I guess
Separately.
you're getting it as a result. Yeah, I guess that's not. It's not directly analogous to either, because here the power is the reward, and normally in the sort of Zelda and Metroid games, the power is the enabler.
Yeah.
It's the thing that you need to get there. So it does kind of twist that a little bit. You're taking everything you know so far, and then after you use that to defeat a boss, you're going to get another power that now will let you get somewhere else in the world. One game that we mentioned not that long ago, last episode or two, was Darksiders. The very similarly gothic story about the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah, that's true. There's some
Vigil.
similarities there.
Is that Vigil Entertainment?
Yep.
They're not around anymore because they were part of that whole, what is it?
THQ.
Yeah,
I think they kind of, some of those guys started up a new thing, but yeah.
Yeah. So but it's sort of similar scale. I would say this is even a little bit more of a light touch. I felt like, Darksiders was was a little bit heavier in terms of the meaning of all this that's going on, and all the characters and how they all tie together. And here it's just like, here's this world, something horrible's been done to you. You're basically like the bride from the Kill Bill movies. You're gonna have your revenge, and they're due that revenge, and you've been out of action for a long time, and you're coming back, and you're going to use your hatred to reave their souls.
I wonder if it's going to stay that way, though. As far as like the light touch, because one thing that this series is known for is its lore, I guess, and its kind of world building. Nosgoth and such, for the sort of cult fans, Nosgoth is a big deal as a place. And there's Soul Reaver 2, there's Defiance, maybe there's another one after that, Blood Omen 2. There's quite a few games in the series, and I think it's probably just heaping piles upon fiction upon fiction on top of it. And being a lore guy myself, I will say, when it did start, it was nice not to need to know anything, but as they started talking about some of the bit of history they gave you, although it was a tiny bit, about what had gone on before this, I did feel the need to want to, and I haven't yet. No, I'm definitely going to go back and kind of look at the wiki for the previous game, but I did kind of feel that urge to fill in the blanks for myself because I have a hard time not knowing, And the first game, actually, which you may know, was basically a totally different genre, which was also weird. It was a isometric, Diablo-esque kind of action RPG kind of game.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and you were and it was very violent for the time. I think part of the thing that at the time, I don't remember what year it was, a few years before this, of course. A lot of blood, a lot of gore. That was one that Silicon Knights did, but I think Crystal helped out in some way, and so there was some confusion over that. But and there's some weird relationship stuff there. But it was a totally different genre. Yeah, and you played as Kain in the first one,
right.
And you were a vampire basically going around just laying waste to humans in very gory ways. And I think that's what they're alluding to when he came into power over the course of that game. But
that's what I got the sense too, is that he just, I don't know, just acquired so much blood and just bathed in it for so long that, it made him become a super powerful vampire. And then he, created his own vampires, his own, children or whatever. I love the scene of the, of the ripping of the wings. It's so very, it's literally Lucifer, right? It's being cast down out of heaven. He refers to Kain as basically a deity, that he had been deified or something like that. And so, it's very much, I don't know how Paradise Lost came up in our pre-show, but it is, it's about Lucifer being cast out of heaven, even though his name is Raziel instead. And of course, Kain is tied in biblically as well. I'm sure his name was chosen for its, Christian, underpinnings.
Yeah, I think I read that Paradise Lost was an influence on maybe the first Kain or maybe this one. I forget, but that's how it came up. Yeah.
Yeah, and he has his wings torn, and he is beautiful too, right? When he comes up, he's this beautiful vampire, and he's cast aside and thrown. That's really great. And then I guess basically what happens after that is we get into a bit of a tutorial.
Yes. Yeah, and the to speak about the tutorial for a second, at the same time as talking about some of the gameplay influences. The third-person action side of this is especially for this era. So it was 99 that it came out, and as you mentioned, sort of toward the end of the PlayStation 1's cycle. PlayStation 2 was about to come out, right? Is that what you said, 90?
Yeah, it came in 2000.
2000, yeah. So it was the next year. So it was on everyone's tip of their tongue, probably, and so people were, I think, and Tomb Raider was also a big game on PlayStation 1, and so it also came on Dreamcast, which I remember the Dreamcast version being a very good version of the game as well, and the concept of getting deeper third person action adventure games like this it became like the genre really started coming into its own after people started taking, I would say, the Tomb Raider, and obviously being influenced by the Nintendo stuff as well, Tomb Raider games, and basically improving upon them, because this was as you start the tutorial, is starting to teach you, jump and a few basic things that were a lot more free flowing than the Tomb Raider games, which had tank control. In fact, I think the third or fourth Tomb Raider game came out in '99 as well, and it was starting to see its age because it was still tank controls, it was still grid based, and felt very constricting.
Very confined.
This one is this one definitely feels like the next era of third person games.
It's opening up already. Yeah, you do have to line things up more. But yeah, as you mentioned, things aren't on a grid, and in particular, they use that artistically, to differentiate the sort of two worlds that you can exist in. One is the spectral realm, and the other is the material realm. In the material realm, everything is sort of rectilinear and and as you'd expect. But then in the spectral realm, things get warped and twisted, and the fact that it's not on a grid, helps that, or it's, I don't know, is in concert with that in some way. So you've got, spaces that don't just line up perfectly like they have to in those early Tomb Raider games in particular, and for that matter in your Indiana Jones game. So
yeah, and you already mentioned it, but I think in the tutorial you start the basically once the first real time cinematic starts, you're introduced to the Elder God, which is sort of the Cthulhu inspired whatever it is, and starts to tell you about being a Soul Reaver and how you can essentially, harvest souls to survive, and that he is kind of given you life again so you can act in his stead and also gain revenge, and so you now have this power where you can gain souls. But then you're also introduced to, as Brett said, this plane walking, where you can go between the material plane and the what's the name of the other
spectral
plane? Yeah, spectral realm, right? It's between the two realms, and that ended up being a signature of this whole franchise, really, and a kind of one of the cooler aspects of the game that I think is what delighted people when they started playing this particular one, because Legacy, the first one, not only was it a different genre, but didn't have any of that realm hopping stuff, and so it ended up becoming this interesting layer of puzzle creation that a lot of games didn't have at the time, where you can go between these realms and actually need to go between these realms to actually progress, and so they teach you about that.
It's just something, it's something that you'll see later in games like, although it's not a third-person action-adventure, the Metroid Prime series, right, where you have different visor modes, basically, as ways of kind of seeing the world differently. This is a little bit similar, and maybe a precursor of that, who knows. Certainly, since the Metroid Prime games were made in the U.S., those folks probably had seen this game. But also, what I'll also say about the sort of the soul feeding and reaving and whatever, is that mechanic also ties into this realm stuff. So when you're in the material realm, you're just slowly dripping away your sort of health, because you're in this realm where you don't really belong anymore. Mm-hmm. And so your health meter is just kind of slowly draining, pretty slowly, but it's always draining. And you fill it by defeating enemies and sucking in their souls. If you run out, or if by choice, you can at any time choose to go back to the spectral realm. And I particularly liked how that mechanic added a sort of, it motivated you to keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
Right? It propels. So, we're playing a revenge story, and revenge stories are all about propulsion. John Wick, it's got a sequel out in theaters right now, right? But John Wick is like propulsion, right? And when you boil down, you are driven to get your revenge, and having a mechanic that forces you to keep moving forward to get to that next combat so you can refill this meter and stay in the material world is really, it fits pretty hand in glove. I thought that was pretty clever. A pretty clever interaction, and I wasn't really expecting it.
No, and I'd only played this a little bit. Neither of us have finished the game, and you hadn't played it all, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd only played a little bit.
I've never played a game in this series at all.
Yeah, and I'd forgotten about how integral the soul aspect of things really was, and I agree. I think it's very clever and very cool that it is so well thought through, and I had forgotten it or just, I don't know, maybe didn't get that far into it, but it was happily surprised about the kind of interesting, I guess, tension that's created there. I think you make a good point about how it relates quite nicely to the characters' motivations as well. And so I think we've talked about this about other games, but anytime you can have the mechanics and the systems relate to the characters' motivations, you know, that's the ideal. And it fits together really nicely here.
Everything. I mean, you know, we talked a lot about sort of holistic design. There's a lot of different ways to achieve that, and you know, here it's achieved, you know, through, you know, finding ways to make the story and the mechanics tie together really well. And you know, I wouldn't say that was necessarily the strength of, you know, Ueda's games. You know, they were holistic in different ways that we talked about. You know, but having just played those third-person action adventures, you know, this is more mechanically, mechanically and narratively linked, and that is really that is a sign of a strong game. Often, as long as those both halves hold up as well. It's a lot to do to make a game. Every time I think about this stuff, I'm just like, oh man, games are hard. How do games ever get made?
Yeah. Well, I feel like this era too, because we keep hitting this same kind of like 5-year gap, I feel like, or chunk, because I feel like this era, games are getting a bit better production value on things for the time, and maybe CD-ROM was really the reason, and then there were, but it was still a time when risks were being taken, you know, and you could, because this, I don't even remember if Raziel is actually in the first game. I don't think he is, or maybe
I wouldn't think so based on the story.
Yeah, and I agree. Anyway, I just don't remember. But assuming he's not, essentially the fact that other than having Kain other than having Kain as the boss, like this is essentially a new IP almost, right? And so they just had some ideas about what they were going to do with this third-person action game, and you know, and just heaped a bunch of different things in there. And the other surprise as we're going through this training that I had was just the depth of the mechanics. There's actually a lot going on that I don't remember. Picking things up. You can pick so when you're in the material plane, one of the cool things is that you can interact with the material objects in that plane. Of course, you can pick rocks up, you can pick torches off of the wall, you can throw things, you can light things on fire, you can pick the enemies up, who are typically vampires, and so you can't kill them.
I want to get into the combat in a minute, but yeah, go on.
Yeah. So anyway, and we can we'll get into details in a second, but the concept that you can, you know, interact with this stuff in so many different ways, which we can talk about later, kind of surprised me, and it reinforces the whole planeswalking thing, because you can't do that stuff when you're in the spectral realm, and so you can't even open doors in the spectral realm. So you drop things when you go to the spectral realm. So it's it's a very clean.
They hang in air, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a very clean.
The physics stops or something like that. Yeah. It's a clean break.
It's cleanly understood. You know what I mean? Like, it makes sense to you. And even if you're not a fan of horror or sci-fi or what have you, you know, it kind of you once they've described it, it's pretty cool. And then you kind of partner that with the soul reaving that you do, and the kind of that resource that is your resource. Essentially, it's a time resource when you're in the material realm, because you run out if you don't do anything. But it's also kind of a life, right? It's a dual, like we talked about with the grip meter in Shadow. It's got dual purposes,
right? Right.
And even another kind of purpose. There's sort of a tertiary purpose, which I just realized before we started recording. Of when you are low, you can drop back to the spectral realm anytime, where obviously your health does not slowly erode, and then you can go around and kind of harvest to get it back up. And you can't actually go back to the material realm until you're fully healed.
That's right.
Which they didn't really explain at all, that I remember.
It was mentioned, actually, yeah.
Was it mentioned you had to be full health?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I missed that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of tutorialization, so you can miss it, for sure.
Yeah, and
they're basically one-liners. And, you know, it's an era where you had to read the effing manual, so
Yeah, which I browsed through, and there's a lot in there. It's like a 30-page manual. So
yeah, it's substantial. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there. I learned about that you could immolate from that, so I particularly like that. But yeah, you have to. I mean, there's tons of sort of soul stuff. You can actually, even if you're not harvesting, you can just sit there and hold the button and wait. It will eventually fill. It's a lot slower if you don't find the sort of big glowing souls or fight enemies or whatever.
Oh, you mean when you're in Spectral Realm?
Yes.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah. So you can
you can just stand there and I mean it takes a lot longer because you get sort of a big chunk from one of those big floating soul orbs. But yeah, it will just kind of slowly trickle in, and there's an effect for it. You can see that there's little bits. But yeah, there's combat that goes on in both. I mean, there's two things about the combat. One is it is fairly simple. It's one button with a lock-on button, I guess, maybe as a second button, and there's the ability to dodge. So there's not a lot of this is not a combo game. This is not Devil May Cry that we've mentioned before. This is not Ninja Gaiden. It's or any kind of fighting game mechanic. This is purely like you can hit. You can hit stuff, and you can move out of the way of stuff. But the way that they've actually, and you've alluded to this, the way they've kind of made that a little bit deeper is that most of the enemies have sort of multiple stages or have a second stage. You beat them up enough to stun them, and then you can pick them up and use the environment to dispose of them in multiple ways. You can throw them on a spike that's sticking around, sticking out of the wall somewhere, which I thought was a strange decorative choice for a vampire's home. To have all these spikes all over the place. I guess that's them just toying with their own immortality. You can throw them into water, which will destroy them and harm you if you get into it in the material realm. And then you can throw them into shafts of light. Which I had forgotten you could do and kind of accidentally did to a vampire later. I thought that was pretty great. And then, as you mentioned, you have these weapons that you can pick up, and you can use those to impale or immolate them as well. So you've got lots of sort of environmental stuff. I found what I most of the time was doing was just running around with a handheld spike, which tends to do more damage anyway, and then just impaling it, impaling the enemy. A great thing about that is if you try to pick up that implement again without reaving their soul, they stand back up. So if you stab them with a sharp implement, and then you don't reave their soul, which causes their body to disintegrate, and you pick up that weapon again, they will just pop right back up and keep fighting. Which I thought was a great thing as well. It just really, the first time it happened, I was like, oh man, whoops. Because you're often fighting like two enemies. You're not often fighting more than two, because again, PS1 era sort of tech. Although pretty late in PS1.
And the camera's pretty simple, so I think there's not, it's pretty, there was still on the cusp of that transition to where people were not yet embracing the right stick for camera control. And you had mentioned that originally this was a D-pad, digital movement game, and so you probably turned on analog, right, on this version that we're playing.
I didn't know you could.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I didn't. I was just fishing around in the PlayStation 3 menu,
Oh, is there a setting in the pause menu?
Yeah, one of the options there is turning on analog.
In the system menu.
In the system menu, yeah.
Oh man, I didn't even notice that. Oh wow, well that'll make it so much easier.
But there's no control. The camera control is still based on R2 and L2, which is still silly, but of the era for sure. And I just read in the manual that I wish I would have read earlier that if you hold both R2 and L2 down at the same time, you go into a look mode of some kind, which is frustrating because you can't look up, and there's places that you actually have to jump up to, and you can't actually see them very well. So I assume that's how you see those.
Yeah. So, I guess we can get to that. The cameras probably. I mean, the camera and the controls generally, I would say, are pretty weak. We both switched to the PS1 version, which you can get from the PlayStation Store on PS3.
Yeah, we should mention that. Yeah.
Well, and if you've got a PSP, apparently it's still playing on that. It's the controls are not terrific, and the camera has probably been my biggest concern, both because of the L2 R2. Spin
rotation.
The rotation around the character, but also, as you mentioned, because there's no verticality, and this was sort of, I think, the time when that was starting to become a thing. It's certainly something that we were talking about. 5 years later in Republic Commando, was actually trying to get more verticality into our level design and things like that.
Yeah, we talked a lot about it with Indie as well. Because all the third person action games were struggling with how they were going to deal with that. Mario being the one that kind of, I would say, cracked it earliest. But
yeah. So I got all the way to the boss fight and finished that. You didn't. So I wanted to talk about why you didn't, and then we can talk about my own concerns with the boss battle, because the camera stuff directly ties into it.
So I'll use this as a segue also to talk about the warp gates or whatever they're called. There are these. I forget what they call them. Do you remember what they call them literally?
I think they are warp gates.
Warp gates, yeah. So there are these warp gates you find throughout the game that I assume are going to be essentially shortcuts, fast travel, sort of used for that later on. I haven't needed them yet, other than when I restarted a game from a save. And so when you are standing on these pedestals, you're looking at this gate that's in front of you, and it's actually a pretty cool concept. And once you hit square, it kind of the gate kind of turns on, but then you have control to kind of to move the stick left or right to change which gate you're going to go through or which location you're going to go into if you use the gate. And some of them are locked. Most of them are locked off to me right now because we've just started. But once you find one, then it unlocks it, so you can basically go throughout the gates that you've unlocked. And so each gate has essentially a symbol associated with it, which I assume is the area that you were in has a symbol. It's probably associated with each of the bosses, the clans, essentially. So it's all pretty nicely woven together in that way, which I really like.
And it enables a sort of simple save anywhere. Because the way save works, if you just save kind of anywhere, it works like Zelda in that when you leave an area, enemies replenish.
Yeah,
I assume not bosses, but basically you start back by the Elder God and go to the warp gate to get to wherever you want to be.
Yeah,
when you save and quit and restore. So
objects are saved. Did you notice that? Which is nice.
I did notice that, yes.
Yeah, which was nice to see a little bit of that going on. Probably for logic reasons, they may have to do that. But anyway, yeah. And then as a quick side note, did you notice that pedestal in the Elder God room that you can stand on to get a hint for what you're doing?
No.
Did you try that? Yeah,
I did not.
There's a little pedestal there that has green glowing. It almost looks like the souls themselves. Mm-hmm. But when you stand on it, it gives you kind of a Shadow of the Colossus style voice line that kind of refreshes your memory about what you should be doing.
Oh, that's good.
So it's a bit poetic, so you're not really sure what he means all the time, but it was maybe enough of a. Well, apparently it didn't help me because I'm already stuck. So anyway,
the word you're looking for is oracular. Not
okay.
Poetic.
Okay, thank you for
because it tells you something, but it's confusing.
Right, sure, yeah. Well, and it's obfuscated in the writing, right? It's like it's subtly giving you a clue without hearing it.
Like the Oracle at Delphi.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Scholar.
Let me just line those dots up and draw little dotted lines between them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyway, these portals are cool in that you can warp between them. However, what I think happened to me is once I'd opened, I think I had maybe 2 or 3 opened, this game doesn't do a good, from a level design, like world design perspective, it doesn't do a great job for me so far at really keeping track of where you've been and where you need to go and directionality of things. And I find myself wanting a map. It really shouldn't need a map, but I feel like I want one. And so I think I warped through a couple gates maybe in the wrong direction and kind of had to retread some areas. And I've gotten to this spot, which I think I'm in the right place because I've gotten to it multiple times at this point and can't progress. There's some water and some platforms you have to jump over to get over the water if you want to stay in the material realm. And of course, Brett mentioned it, if you fall into water too deeply when you're in the material realm, then you will basically go back to the spectral realm. And it's kind of cool because there's some inaccessible areas that are underwater that you can actually kind of go to in the spectral realm, if you so choose. However, that didn't yield my answer when I did that, so I'm stuck in that area and I don't really know where to go next. There's a block area over there, but the point being is that the warp gates basically kind of turned me around, you know what I mean? I kind of lost my sense of direction, and there aren't a lot of clues or hints about giving me... It's a very powerful warp gate system, which is cool, but if you're not really tapped into how the areas are connected to each other, and you don't remember the symbols, about which area you're in and which one you need to go to based on the symbol, you're going to get confused pretty quickly.
Right. I won't argue with that for sure. There is, if you cross that water, and you can just platform your way across,
which I did.
There is a gate on the other side of that,
which I went through.
Okay, so you went two.
I went through the gate, and there's
you can activate it,
pillar,
right? And then you can go across I guess into the next room. I feel like there's not a lot weird going on there.
I know, it's probably me.
I think you might have just missed a turn somewhere.
But that brings me to my additional point, right? In that because with the combination, so this is a problem with this era of game anyway, and it's not necessarily their fault. I think everyone was trying to figure out at the same time. But when you have camera controls the way that they have them, and you have level design, which we still hadn't really, and to be honest, we still haven't always figured it out even today. But at the time, we definitely hadn't figured out the concept of level design flow when it comes to building the levels in tandem with the kind of camera that you have. You can't build a level in a vacuum from the camera design. And so there's been a couple times when I'm running into a room and the camera is going to naturally track behind my head because that's what it's automatically going to do, but then there'll be a sharp left turn that'll basically be a 180 right to my left, and the camera will never have show me that.
You won't see it. Yep. I missed the first warp gate door that way, and I found it, I don't know, retracing my steps, I guess. I don't remember how I managed to find that. Oh, I found it because I switched platforms. We both, I think, originally started on the PC and just found the controls too dated.
I had a different reason, but I'll share you in a second.
Oh, okay. I had other reasons, but that was the biggest one. I found the keyboard controls just so unintuitive at this point.
Sure, it's rough. Yeah.
It's the 4 arrow, and even though the mapping is, it's fine. My fingers can reach everything. I just mentally can't.
It doesn't feel like a keyboard game.
It does not feel like a keyboard game. It feels like this was console first kind of design as far as controller. I tried plugging in a controller, and there were no dead zones on the stick, so he just ran around in circles constantly. So I said, you know what? Let's see if there's another way to play this game.
Yeah,
turns out you could.
Steam for me, I think it's because I'm running Win 10. It won't run at all.
Oh, really?
It just crashes on load.
It runs on Win 10 for me, but I had to use a software renderer.
Interesting. It might be my card. Yeah, I did some digging.
You can choose. Yeah, this is like.
Yeah.
This is good radio. Here's how to tune your PC.
Well, anyway, I'll just use it as a warning for people running on Steam. I'm running an NVIDIA, 980, so I don't know. There's some combination of things. It's just, and I did some digging on some patches and stuff, and there are definitely answers out there, but I was like, I'm not going to put the time into it. So the PlayStation's definitely, smooth sailing. And so just that camera flow, I wanted to make that point because, again, this era we were still trying to figure out how you partner those two things. And it could be that the camera was being developed at the same time as the levels, so, people, in a first-person sense, which was obviously another popular genre of the time, the exploration side of it, you could have those sort of 90 degree and 180 degree turns because there was a goal. One of the goals of the game was maybe to explore the room, and it was like, oh, find the door, But when your camera is there, you're making some expectations that you're seeing. And I think part of it is because we're playing this later when I have expectations that cameras are actually trying to help you, not prevent you from finding things. So I'm just not training myself. Well, now I'm going to start looking more because
it's funny because I didn't feel like I ever got lost. I always felt like I knew where I needed to go, if not exactly what I needed to do. In fact, I at one point had to put it down for a while because I was just totally stuck. I know I'm in the right place. I should be able to move this block. There's a block puzzle that you haven't gotten to yet. Put it down, came back later, and it turned out that there was a bug where a block had fallen through into another block, and so they were in the same space, and so I couldn't move the blocks. It was just bugged. It was just broken. But when I came back, when I reloaded, it was fine. That was annoying.
That's not the blocks near the water that I was talking about, was it?
No.
There's a block in there, too.
There's a block in there, but you're going to... That's for later for you.
I can't use it right now.
Yeah, I'll give you a hint there that's going to be when you kind of come back this way. Because it does kind of circle back into that room at some point.
Okay.
Which was also a little confusing. But then I do feel like, aside from that bug... I always had a pretty good sense of I'm going this direction now because I opened that gate. Often there are gates that you need to open, doors and things like that. So it's I went through this door, so now I know, that's not the way I need to go, whatever the opposite of that is, And so I kind of use those as my point of reference for where I'm going.
Sure.
Because often it's go through a door, have a little combat, and now figure out, okay, where am I supposed to go now? Okay, I came through there, so it must be over there? And so that's just kind of how I make my way through the world. But I totally take your point because I did get to the boss battle with Melchiah. Is that what we said his name was?
Something like that, yeah.
And his battle requires a little bit of vertical thinking. There are these gates that are closed. And on either side of the gates there are these pillars. It turns out you can jump and get on top of a pillar and get into the room on the other side of the gate. But it's very hard to see that from the viewpoint that you have.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Because the camera's a straight-on camera. It's not a low camera. I don't know what you'd call that in film terms, but it's a mid shot or whatever. Yeah. It's not a high or low angle shot, right? So it's a neutral shot in that respect, and so you can't actually see very well things that are much above head height. And depending on how far you are, you might not be able to see at all. So it took me a long time of running around in this room, going, okay, I see those levers in there. What am I supposed to do? There's this lever and that won't work, and so it took me a long time to puzzle out something that probably wasn't meant to be that difficult, but was made difficult again, like you said, because of the camera design. But yeah, I mean third-person cameras were not super well understood at this time, and certainly not for this sort of game. Yeah,
and I think one of the I don't know. I don't want to speak too harshly, but I think one of the excuses that we would use at the time, and I'll include myself in this too, is that, because the cameras were not, we hadn't felt like we had cracked the code yet. We would sort of blame the camera for some of the usability problems that we would have. But again, I'd reiterate my point that level design and camera have to go together. So
you have to
no matter what
together.
camera you have, to your point about like the verticality, there's been quite a few times when the place I needed to go was above me, but the camera literally was not framing it in any way. Right. And that's kind of like 101 no stuff, that I think they probably convinced themselves in this particular case that because they had that look around feature, maybe that was a Band-Aid after the fact, that they were okay. Because we have the look around feature, so, technically there's a way.
Yeah, on the PC, it's probably just a button, and it probably is just a little bit better,
maybe.
Because you can easily pop into it. I haven't thought to do that, because you can, the way it describes it in the manual was that you could do that to fine-tune aiming a weapon you're going to throw.
Right.
So
which you can also throw, the things that you have in your hand, by the way.
Right. Yeah. So but it didn't occur to me to use that all the time. Although it should have, because that was something you could do in Metal Gear as well at the time, right? Metal Gear Solid. Come out a little bit before this, I think.
And I don't know, maybe because this isn't a gun-based, a projectile-based game. You can throw things, but I think in the Metal Gear games it made a little more sense because you usually had a gun that you would be, firing.
Right.
You'd want to.
Yeah, fair enough.
But anyway, so I'm wondering if it's something like that is why. So I'm on the right track.
And the other thing too was that the tools were not always the same as the game, right? So it's entirely possible that in the tools they had basically mouse look.
Yeah, exactly.
So and that doesn't excuse them by any means, but just from experience of being a game developer, I see those sorts of ways where that might have come in, where these mistakes might have been made.
Sure.
So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and understood. And just full transparency, I've made the same mistakes myself. So I'm definitely not.
And I've programmed bad cameras. So
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
so it's just I think because we were playing this, in 2017, it is impacting it differently, right? At the time, we might have been more forgiving.
Absolutely.
There's a lot going on in this game. There's more going on than I had realized, and I'm happily surprised by that. And I don't mean story wise. Just I think as far as even I would even say some nuanced details in the notes that I wrote down. That aren't worth kind of getting into depth on, but pretty good mantle system and kind of like collision detection on his jumps as far as hitting edges and kind of he'll have a secondary grab that he'll automatically grab onto and you can just push up on the stick and he'll climb up, versus needing to have the feet contact, which is something Tomb Raider didn't do a good job at. Like on the Tomb Raider games, her feet had to hit that platform.
Right.
Or you were not going to make the jump. So there's some nuance in there that I think Crystal became really good at in this engine, and I think the irony is that there's probably some deep code in this game that is still around in the Tomb Raider games today.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all because, as you mentioned, the mantling system in particular. I mean, just sort of attaching hands to basically a line in space. Is the sort of thing that a Tomb Raider game, in 2017 does all the time.
Yeah.
And luckily it has a better camera to support that. But yeah, definitely here, I definitely appreciated and noticed that as well. I also really appreciated the sort of Foley, that there's a lot of good character nuance of when he...
pushing the blocks are just...
Yeah.
That's a cool little...
Yeah, I think we should do character design and sort of all the stuff around him, I guess, next time maybe. But
sure,
because there's a lot of great stuff in Raziel himself. But I did appreciate from a control perspective and feedback perspective the having a little animation and Foley of I floated across and I landed, and he always like puts his feet down hard, like bam, I'm here, And
he's for the time. I think he's well animated, for sure. Yeah.
Kind of brings to mind another game. I don't know if you ever played the Medieval series. A couple of those games back in the day.
I remember them. I don't know if I played them though.
Yeah, they're like a lot goofier
or something.
Yeah, you were a you were dead, you're undead skeleton with no brain, and it was kind of a little bit more slapstick, but there was some similarity in. I don't know. It brought it to mind playing this because I really enjoyed those games. They're kind of straight up, forgettable platformers, but yeah, it occurred to me partly because he was a skeleton.
We definitely need to talk about him in more depth next time because there's a lot of little things like his animation when he sucks in souls, and there's a lot of character there that I think Crystal always was also good at especially when it comes to animating their characters. Right, there was just they really prioritized that heavily, and maybe that was Amy's influence or not, but it's something that they've been doing since and before as well. So, it's good, a lot of good stuff.
Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back, and we have a couple pieces of feedback, and we'll talk about next time.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We've got a couple of emails sent into devgameclub@gmail.com. We really love to get your feedback and love to discuss stuff on the show. I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste one of these in for you to read in the second part, or you can read the second one, I guess I mean. But first we have one from Nick Tapalansky. Nick says, "Hey guys, I wanted to drop you guys a line. In addition to the review I just put up, to thank you for all the work you put into this show. It's always a bright spot when it pops up in my queue, and I really dig hearing your perspectives on games I've loved and being inspired to play those I'd missed in the past. I just caught up on the Ueda series, filed them under the games I never got around to, but now plan to spend some time with, and heard Tim mention the Eco novel a few times, but that his copy was in Japanese. Well, good news! Viz put out a translation back in 2011 that you guys might be interested in checking out, and he provides a link that I'll put in the show notes.
Huh.
It was released in Japan in 2004, so I don't know if it'll add too many details to the implied connections between the three games, or if they'd even be considered canon if they were present, but it's certainly another way to experience the story and explore such a rich world. And then he has a question for us, which is, would you guys ever consider doing a flash-forward episode to dissect a modern game and present a sort of thesis dissection of influences that you can glean? You've done some of this with games related to the classics you're playing, like The Last Guardian, The Evil Within, but it'd be cool to get your take on something like Oxenfree from Night School, where there's a fairly evident lineage pushing back into the old-school adventure era. Love the show and definitely looking forward to playing Soul Reaver with you guys. Best, Nick." Thank you, Nick. So yeah, I told him in email that he'd get basically an on-air production meeting from us. We could talk that through. I do kind of like the idea. I don't know that we'd make spend as much time as we typically do. We normally spend 3 or 4 episodes talking about one of these classic games, and so I don't know that we'd want to do that, like we do, and totally take something apart. But that it is kind of interesting. It's almost like a stump the chump sort of thing. Oh, what games went into this mix? To look at something current that we're not playing something connected to directly. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I do like the reverse engineering aspect of it. It's something, I guess I will admit, that we do kind of day to day, like in our day jobs, right? I mean, part of our work is to try to be relevant, stay relevant and up to date with the games that are coming out, and to kind of think about how they would influence our own game we're working on, and then where their influences have come from. Because I think one of the challenges of our industry, of any industry, especially creative industries, not just games, of course, is where do the sea changes come from? When does somebody get an idea, or is there a convergence of ideas where a game stands out to all of us as developers of like, why didn't I think of that? But everything has a lineage of some kind, and it is fascinating. I will be honest, something that we did talk about when we started the podcast, for me specifically, and I don't know if this is as big a deal as it maybe was when we were starting the podcast, and so maybe I shouldn't worry as much, but I think I guess it's a little bit of behind the scenes thing for listeners. Because I am currently working for a company, I did feel like it was our responsibility to be careful. Like Brett's independent, so he has more flexibility, but I have to be careful about how I criticize and talk about, I think, games that are coming out as contemporaries to my own. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so
that's a fair point.
I do feel like I have to be at least responsible with that, because I want to make sure that I don't. Because if we do analyze a game, I want to be honest, right? I want to analyze it in a critical way, and I want to, and if something that I didn't like, say we analyze a shooter, right? Because I work on shooters, then there's some conflict of interest there. So that was one thing on our minds, at least on my mind, for playing modern games. And I felt like if we played classic games, then there was much more of a permission there, So
yeah, that's a fair point, for sure. If I were still at Bethesda, I'd feel a lot more closed about talking about games that are currently out. I am happy to tell you, I'm happy to tell anybody my opinion of a game that's right out on shelves right now, because I'm not really, I'm not working on anything competitive with it. But it is kind of not really done amongst game developers. I mean, it's just kind of professional courtesy, not to, to let the critics do the sort of current thinking on games. So yeah, I mean, that's a fair point.
And I'm probably more paranoid than I should be about that, but especially working for a bigger company, I need to think of the PR side of things occasionally. I try to, at least. I think as we have a lot of peers out there, and we want to kind of be respectful of each other. But I love the idea for sure, and so maybe we find the right game that doesn't kind of step on anyone's toes, and we could do something like that.
Well, yeah, and maybe talking about a game's lineage without sort of taking it apart. In a sort of might be a safer way to go. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth thinking about. Nick, thank you. You've got the other one.
Okay, yeah. So this one's from the one Brett Duville. Sorry, it's from Luke. Luke.
Terrio.
Terrio? That's what I was going to say. Is it Terrio? Okay.
Yeah. It's Terrio.
Luke Terrio. Hey guys, been a dedicated listener since your wonderful series on Final Fantasy IX. So far I've been content to enjoy your interesting and insightful discussions without feeling the need to play along, but I think with Soul Reaver I'm finally going to take the plunge. I originally picked up the game for the PS1 on the strength of a short demo. The atmospheric world, with its vampiric art and gothic architecture, felt unusually real to me. An ancient place steeped in its own history and mythology, and I couldn't wait to experience more. Unfortunately, the awkward camera and somewhat non-linear gameplay, were a bit much for the inexperienced gamer I was at the time, and I set it aside. A couple of years ago, I picked up a copy on GOG during a sale, but an imposing backlog meant I didn't get to it then either. Dev Game Club tackling this game is my sign to finally dust off those fashionable mummy wraps and scarf and get back to work. Those souls ain't gonna reave themselves. What a great mail.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, hopefully it's working on your PC. I definitely had trouble, and there's definitely patches out there to fix it if you do have. I saw some people on GOG were also having trouble, but yeah, good. I'm glad that we could dust that sucker off for you. I will say that I'm looking forward to playing more. So I'm glad that.
Yeah, I had to hold myself back actually from playing more. Today I had a little bit of time. I was like, I want to wait until we've at least talked about what we've played so far before I get back into it. So
I think it's funny he mentioned the camera and the nonlinear, which is exactly what I'm having trouble with. So.
Yep. Well, no, I that's why I let you read it. While you were reading that, I did double back and check the RSS feeds. I guess I missed this. But Nick did, in fact, also post us a review, which I'll read. He says, excuse me. Geez, what a great find. I've been subscribing to the show since they covered Final Fantasy IX and haven't missed an episode since, and even doubled back to check out what I'd missed. Each episode is loaded with industry history, development theory, and interesting perspectives from two veteran game designers. It's a wonderful way to revisit games you've loved while also getting recommendations for classic games you might have missed. Whether you're a casual gamer, exploring game development, or somewhere between the two, you owe it to yourself to hit that subscribe button. So thank you, Nick.
Yeah, nice.
I really appreciate that. That's a review from from iTunes, which is another thing we like to read on the cast when we get them. We don't get such a flood of them that we can't read them all, so we do try to. And I am subscribed to podcast review feeds from around the globe, so I do try to hit them all. So yeah, I normally see them. If you don't hear us read your review on the cast, just ping me with a mail, as Nick mentioned in his. I guess when the mail came in, it hadn't actually posted to the RSS feed yet, so I didn't notice. But yeah, it's great to get those reviews. It's a way to reach new listeners, or you can go out and tell a friend and share the podcast with them and your love of games and our love of games.
Very nice.
Very nice. But yeah, so thank you all for your feedback, Nick and Luke in particular this time, but everyone who's taken time to review the cast or send us an email over the past 50 plus episodes. This is actually our 50th episode.
Yes. Wow, look at that.
I know, right?
A milestone. Good for us.
Good for us. Yay, we did it.
And thank you for listening this far.
Well, and hopefully we'll keep you hooked. So what have we decided to play up till next time? Since you'll actually be still catching up to what we played for this time,
Yeah. How far do you think I am from that boss?
You've got a ways to go, my friend.
Oh, no.
I mean, it's probably, it's not like 4 hours, but it's like a good hour.
Yeah.
And there are several puzzles. So, we didn't really talk about puzzle stuff at all because I don't think in the stuff you played there were really nothing really significant. That's going to start to change.
Yeah, I just spent all that time kind of going in circles with those darn warp gates. Basically what happens is I second guess myself, right? I see symbols and I think I know what they mean and I'm kind of, so... Anyway, it's going to be an interesting game for me because of the way my brain thinks. And I'm a completionist, so I'm looking in places I probably don't need to be looking right now. I just need to trust the level design, which I'm having a hard time doing. Anyway, we're going to use the bosses, which are, Raziel's brethren, as kind of a guide for our episodes. And so the next episode, we're going to play up to taking down Zephon, it looks like, yeah. And so there's a couple bosses between the one we took this time and that one. So
yeah, there's going to be. I think it's going to be basically two boss encounters, we'll if you've played up to Makia, what is this guy's name? Melchiah. Yes, Melchiah. Sorry. Yeah, it's so close. They're all so close to like Christian things, that I'm just like, that's like close to Malchior, and I just can't So yeah, they all have names that are fairly close to, or many of them are very, very close to the sort of Christian devils and demons and things. By design, I'm sure, and those echoes are kind of cool. But yeah, it's I'm looking forward to playing more of the bosses, because I think that's where you often get the sort of variant gameplay, and as we mentioned, you get sort of more powers that way as well. So it should open up the game a bit, and maybe we'll see some of that non-linearity that Luke hinted at. In the meantime, you can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com, as I mentioned earlier, or hit up the cast on Twitter at devgameclub. You can find me at Brett_Duville, and him
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I am not doing a lot of writing on Twitter these days on my main account, but I do make sure I respond to all anything that has to do with the cast. So you will find me there, and I will respond to you. So thanks for joining us for another episode, and we will see you for some more Reaving of Souls next week. Good night.
Good night. I did read the backstory stuff in the manual, and it didn't really help that much. It basically just said the same thing that the opening cinematic.
I skipped those, because I don't care.
I do. I must.
You do too much.